Will it be worth planting combinable crops this autumn, or does the double whammy of high input costs and low grain prices mean the numbers simply don't stack up? Find out in this special episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast recorded live at Cereals 2026, held at Jeremy Clarkson's Diddley Squat farm. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Farmers Weekly podcast, recorded live here at the 2026 Cereals event. I'm Johan Tasker, joined as always by expert arable pundit Louise Impey and common sense farmer and farming commentator Hugh Broom. High fuel and fertiliser prices, mediocre grain prices. It's tough out there in the world of arable farming. And for the next hour, we're going to be addressing what just a few years ago would be an unthinkable question. Is it worth drilling cereals this coming autumn? And if so, what and how do the numbers stack up? In this first session, we're going to be looking at the market, where many of the agronomic decisions are made. And joining us to discuss that are Andrew Williamson, Shropshire farmer and Vice Chairman of NFU Combinable Crops, and Andrew Dewing, independent Norfolk grain trader, Chief Executive of Dewing Grain. We're going to kick off with a few questions. Louise and Hugh are going to jump in with a few thoughts and comments and questions too. But first, Andrew Williamson, what exactly is the situation on farm at the moment? What are your members telling you?
Thank you, Johan. Currently, obviously, the situation on farm at the moment, we're looking at very high input costs through fuel, fertiliser, labour, everything else, all things happening, again, alongside the situation where our commodity prices have not kept pace with the increase in those input costs. It's adding a lot of different challenges to our industry. It's adding a lot of risk to our industry. Every decision we make carries more risk. It's more difficult to make sure whether you're making the right decision or the wrong decision. So it's just putting a lot more pressure on our industry at the moment, particularly in the combinable crop sector.
And can you put a rough sort of break-even number per tonne of wheat at the minute? Where is that balance?
I could have found you exactly how much I was going to grow and how much I was produce on the yield front. And if I knew exactly what my costs were, you could, and that would easily be just for my personal situation. Everyone's situation is very different. From all the situations I've sat through with benchmarking, it's lots of things. It all depends on how your individual business is set up. And really, it's not for me to say that point. It's up to the people in this room to understand their own business, to realise where their price points are.
And Louise, this is a situation that we've discussed a lot on the podcast, an unwanted reality that many farmers are facing.
Yeah, it is. And there are some big decisions and difficult decisions to be made. I think Andrew just made a very good point. It does entirely depend where you are in the country. So out here on this soil, the figures are going to be much tighter and much more difficult than perhaps in the fens. So as you said, it's the individual situation as well as what's happening in the background.
And we've also seen from looking at farm figures that what would be normally considered variable costs and probably your fixed costs, and your fixed costs are your variable costs, and they're the ones that really drive the business and whether they're profitable or not. How you can drill down on those beyond just your input costs and how you operate the business as a whole. And as Louise rightly said, it's very geographical, and some parts have high yield potential, some parts have better prices, and it all depends on where your personal situation is, a little bit towards your own personal degree and how you manage risk within your business.
Andrew Dewing from Dewing Grain, what's the market telling you at the moment? Do the numbers stack up?
Well, what it's telling me at the moment is that it's rained and we got decent grain fill, and all of a sudden what was a very dry harvest in East Anglia has turned into it's not going to be quite as bad as we thought moment. The world seems to have had benign weather as well, so there's nothing coming along to save the day to push the price up. I would go back to the point about cost of production. I can't influence that, but I'm told by my farmers if you get an average yield in Norfolk, it was £165 a tonne for this harvest to break even, and that's a sweeping statement like for land type and all of that. and then it went up because of they'd already bought their fertiliser, etc. The prices have been higher than cost of production in the last month, and the point being, it went above cost of production. And if that's the break-even point, how many farmers actually sold? And I think a lot of them didn't. So what were they waiting for was the question. And now we're slipped back down again. So it's not in a great place at this moment price-wise. It's slipped back down probably to at or below cost of production.
Hugh, not a great place for arable farmers at the moment. You're a livestock farmer. You must be hoping prices keep low.
Look, we've been blessed by low feed prices for the last 2 or 3 years, really, haven't we? I mean, the beef sector saw some record prices last year. The sheep sector at the moment on fire. Not so great in the monogastrics. Obviously, chicken's doing okay. Pigs have had it really tough, so they're happy for the low feed price at the moment. Look, we'll take a low feed price all day long, ideally, though. But at the same time, we're still going to need people to produce that feedstock. And the big worry is that we're heading, as Andrew's just said, we've got amazing weather out there. The grain fell's been phenomenal for most parts of the country. Some places have already set, but for most parts are. There's nothing on the horizon in terms of nastiness to spike the market globally. We end up with a big deluge of grain on farm after this year's harvest. What's that going to do to price? And the worrying thing is, Andrew, how much grain do you still think from last year is still on farm?
Less than the official figures tell us, because there was a point about 2 weeks ago where we were scrapping around trying to buy old crop wheat, and we couldn't. It was really getting squeezed. And hang on a minute, the figures must be wrong, because it said there was going to be an extra, 500,000 or so tons beyond the carryover at least, and it seemed to not be there. Now I think. Well, no, what I know, what happened next was the farmers stopped selling it. It's going to go up. Ensus reopened. Everybody got confident. And we ended up with farmers not selling it and some of the bigger companies importing wheat. So we've imported at the tail end, which guarantees there's a carryover. But there's not as much as the figures suggest. It is tighter.
So there's some hope there that the new season crop will have some customers. It's not going to be blocked out by cheap old season stuff. But it comes back to the whole thing, doesn't it? We talk about the livestock industry, we talk about the arable sector. The two, they're not totally conjoined, but they are reliant on each other. And the worry is we're heading into, as I keep saying, we are in completely uncharted territory in terms of our arable production in this country in the last 60 or 70 years with no support. And that is really worrying.
Andrew Dewing.
Yeah, I think from a consumer's perspective, over the last 5 years, the prices are cheap, prices are low. So you look at it saying, I can't make a living out of this. They're looking at it saying, all right, how cheap is this going to get? There's not much more downside. So I think the downside at the moment is very limited. Farmers are not going to sell. They're certainly not going to sell quality. And there's a major malting barley buyer in the room. I was going to be really rude about malting barley, but I'm going to be really nice now. And that particular crop at the moment, there's not much activity going on. But if you were a farmer, you wouldn't commit at this point because you don't know if it's going to rain like crazy just when you get the combine out of the shed. You'd be mad to because the price isn't high enough. Now, somewhere down the line, there's got to be an incentive for people to grow that product, or it's just going to keep diminishing and disappearing away. But no, prices are cheap. And the hope on the horizon, fertiliser prices, I don't trade fertilisers, I can make a sweeping statement. There has been infrastructure damage to oil and gas in the Middle East. There will be higher prices for fertiliser than historically, and fuel prices are also going to be high. There's a refining problem. All right, we've got Russian stuff coming in now because we can ignore our consciences, but there's still a shortage, so prices will have to go up. So it isn't all bad.
Louise.
Yeah, on the fertiliser front, Andrew Williamson, there's been a big announcement from the NFU today on fertiliser. Do you think the government will be listening?
The government are very good at listening, but whether they'll act is a different matter, Louise. But there is precedent for it because there's been support thrown elsewhere within the EU. There's been some support in Australia. There's support for it in America. So there is thing, and the scheme that we've sort of asked for today mirrors pretty much exactly the EU agreement. And if fertiliser hits a certain trigger point of £500 per tonne, then there's going to be some support going forward we're requesting support from the government to a certain level. But whether they'll do or not, I don't know, because their track record is not great. But we can keep lobbying, we keep asking those questions because we've got to raise that awareness. But nitrogen fertiliser is critical for our industry. It's critical for global industry. 50% of the calories consumed in this world are produced on the back of ammonium nitrate. So if we can't get that really important commodity used, it's not just the people in this room, the people in this country going to start to suffer. It's people around the world who are really, really struggling.
Yeah.
And it's important that all the governments around the world understand the ripples and the repercussions of the closing of the Strait of Hormuz. And it's just, the longer it goes on, as Andrew mentioned, the longer this conflict carries on, the more difficult it's going to get out of it and unwind the damage that's been done.
Andrew Dewing.
Production in the UK is pretty well at break even now. There's a slightly bigger wheat crop this year, but underlyingly the production figures are dropping. And I put to the farming community, that means the boot is on your foot. Now I appreciate the government can allow imports in, and there's lots of issues with the costs you have that are greater and all of the regulation and so on. But you are getting into a place where you are in a stronger position if you could just get yourselves together a little bit. We go back to the 60s when the cooperatives were strong, and they were strong because farmers were genuinely hard up. I think we're heading to that place, and I think there's an opportunity for farmers to actually, if they could trust each other, start having an influence on the volume of different things grown. I think that's your hope somewhere down the line. It's the control of this industry is in very, very big hands. We heard that earlier on in the day. Major corporations control food around the world. The UK, supply and demand is break even to slightly not enough. That's a strong position to go from.
Louise, when we announced that we were going to do this session and call it more or less "Why Bother? Is it worth growing cereals this autumn?" People have sort of started saying to us, we're being too pessimistic. Of course we're going to grow cereals. It's what we do. What's the alternative? Yes, a few people will be growing a bit more grass, hay for horses, etc. But people would be growing cereals. It was more nuanced. It was more the choice, as Andrew Williamson has been saying, about the cost of fertiliser, and also whether people were going to be drilling feed wheat or going for milling varieties.
That's exactly right. The conversations I've been having with people on the showground this morning is feed wheat. Yes, I think they can make that work. Not everybody, but a lot of people can make that work. The more difficult one is milling wheat, and looking at the extra nitrogen fertiliser that's needed, the extra cost, the extra risk. Is that worth doing? And I think people are less decided on that one at the moment.
Andrew Dewing, it is the margins are tight, right? Is it worth it?
I can't see any mill buyers in the room. I know there's two on the site here somewhere.
There is. It's George.
It's George? Oh, George. Oops. Hello, George. Well, why grow milling wheat, Joanna? Why grow milling wheat if it's costing you more money to grow and there's a massive risk in the whole thing? If you've got that little difference. Yes, forward contracts for milling wheat have a decent premium, but the graveyard is full of people who committed to milling wheat premiums, and then it rains. And so it needs to be, there are forward contracts, and you can work with your millers to get a forward supply contract where they'll hopefully be fair if you don't supply the goods. But largely, at the moment, with fertiliser where it is that the sum is not as obvious. And they do import when that gets a bit sticky, which undermines the UK price. That's a miller's right. But the point is, it's a ceiling that goes onto your price.
If you talk about that, it brings us back to where we've been requesting sort of the fairness in the supply chain review, which we've got from the government now, to look at the supply chain, the cereal supply chain, where we are and how fair that is, and whether or not, if we have increased costs, we're not able to pass that cost on to our first consumer. But if you talk to the other people within that supply chain, you say, what are you going to do if your costs go up? Their answer is, we have to pass the cost on, which will eventually end up to the consumer. But we can't do that, and that's something we need to look at and how we get around that. But if we can get a better figure and better idea of within the supply chain and how fair it is, and make sure everyone from the growers like me to the people who are going to buy the food at the end of the day off the shelves, it's all fair for us. And it's everyone. We've all got to make some money at the end of the day. Everyone's got to take their share of it, but we've got to make sure that's fair, understood, and we're not getting undercut by lots of imported grain, which isn't grown to the same standards grown in this country. We really need our government to support our grain trade. And a classic example of that would have been when they reopened NSIS with £100 million subsidy for CO2 production, no mention of food, all about CO2, there could have been a caveat there to request that the grain was coming from the UK. I don't think there was. You probably can't do it through competition law, say it, but there could have been part of it. We would like to see that. And that's another thing where we go. And we need that sort of level of support from the government to make sure that when we do have a good harvest, which we're looking at probably potentially now, that there are homes for the wheat. And we've all seen this season that it's more difficult to find homes for commodities. And we're very blessed in Shropshire where we are. We've got a lot of feed mills, a lot of chickens, and they need to be fed every single day of the year. So our premiums there are sort of feed wheat. So we've got to make sure we've got a fair idea of where the supply chain is and make sure it's fair for all involved.
And looking at the situation now, Andrew Williamson, are you looking at drilling more cereals this autumn, less cereals, or about the same?
We will probably continue to be about the same. Our best producing crops are winter wheat and winter oilseed rape at the moment, and we've got to be driven by profitability. We can grow spring crops, but the risk is higher because we end up tending to have, particularly with these dry springs we're finding, and that's coming from someone from the western side of the country talking about dry springs, which is very different to Cambridgeshire or further south and further east. But there's a bigger risk involved in those crops. And as Andrew mentioned about the malting barley trade, we've seen a massive decline in the malting barley consumption because it's oversupplied. So therefore, we're growing something that's more risky to grow, and we don't know whether there's an end market, and the premium isn't there as it should be. So we tend to stick with what we know.
And Andrew Dewing, looking at the situation going forward, we talked a little bit about crops in store. What sort of strategy should farmers be adopting when looking to market their grain through somebody like Dewing Grain? What are you telling farmers in terms of managing their expectations?
Managing their expectations, that's a good one. Well, I think the next time the price hits 195 for somewhere down the line of the year for a deficit area like ours, then people should sell it, or a bigger percentage, because it's going to guarantee an income. I think they're more confident they're going to get a yield now than they were, so there's a bit more confidence in perhaps making that decision. I think the price of grain for 27 harvest is higher than this year's. It's £10 more, and it probably is at or above cost of production. I mean, I don't know what the fertiliser input cost is going to be, but they've dropped a bit. Certainly, I think you need to look harder at bog standard feed price fixing if it is at a decent level. As far as malting barley is concerned, that's the point. There's an oversupply of it. The answer to the question is create an undersupply of it, and they'll import it all from Denmark. But at some point, there will be a problem in Denmark, France, and the UK, because anyone who's over the age of 30, is going to know there's been several harvests with lots and lots of problems where all goes wrong. And it's a paper-thin supply. It could be this year. It could go through the roof. So I think farmers will plant, and we are losing acres anyway to solar, and we're losing it to whatever the next SFI scheme is. So production is going down and down and down anyway. People are putting less fertiliser on, and they're focusing more on return than yield. So I think it's the problem is solving itself. We just kind of need to make the government realise that in order to compete, it's not fair tying your farmers' feet together and putting a blindfold on and saying, let's have a race with a subsidised European farmer or whoever else we've done a trade deal with. But optimism, I think you're going to be in a break-even opportunity for 27 harvest if you are deciding to plant it. So put some away at a price that locks into that.
Andrew Dewing, thank you very much. We're going to draw this first session to a close. In a minute, we're going to look at exactly the sort of varieties that are out there and how we should be growing those cereals. But for now, please put your hands together for Andrew Williamson from the NFU and Andrew Dewing from Dewing Grain.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast. The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
Part 2 of our Farmers Weekly live podcast here at Cereals 2026 is about growing a cost-effective crop. And joining us now are NIAB cereal variety specialist Claire Lehman and AHDB crop protection scientist Sasha White. So the market picture is changing. We've heard that clearly, but the growers who are going to come through this are going to be those who are most efficient Claire, inbuilt traits are becoming increasingly important in cereal varieties, helping to optimise outputs and reduce crop inputs. I'm thinking of traits like barley yellow dwarf virus resistance in wheat and barley, but there's still some way to go. The science seems to be there, but growers are somewhat reluctant to plant them. Why is that, do you think?
It's still fairly new. It's still a work in progress. I think certainly in wheat, the BYDV varieties have taken a while to catch up, or are taking a while to catch up, inevitably when you have a new type of variety coming in. But each year, the varieties we're getting are substantially better. So they're making grounds each year. And I think so far the varieties that we've had in wheat have just had a bigger drawback than an advantage. They've had a weakness somewhere else, so they haven't really had enough draw, but we're getting there and we will get there. Barley's been a slightly different picture. It's moved much quicker. Barley's an easier crop to work with genetically, so it's faster to move. And we're seeing, in the last few years, the varieties with BYDV tolerance have gone from being at the bottom of the list to potentially next year having one at the top of the list. So there's absolutely no price to pay for having that extra trait. You're not using any yield, you're not sacrificing some other character. There's no downside. So I think we'll see, particularly in barleys, that the take-up really take off now because there isn't a disadvantage.
And Claire, something else that we're starting to hear about, and shifting subjects slightly now, is hybrid wheat. And I think the first varieties are expected in the UK autumn 27. Is that something we should be getting excited about? I don't know much about them.
I think it is. I think anything new is good. Choice is positive. But I think we'll wait and see what they bring straight away. We've had hybrid barley and hybrid rape for many years. The rape has really become very dominant, whereas the barley has been a very sort of static market share. It's found its place and it does its job very well, but people still want the choice. I think with wheat, the first ones we may see, we have had odd hybrid wheats through in the past, and they've always been very much targeted at niche situations, and they've never offered enough. There's not been enough of an advantage to them. So I think with these first ones, again, it might be like the BYDV. The first ones aren't the best. They might be an opening offer, and as the years pass, each generation will be an improvement. But they need to be competitive. They need to offer an advantage. It will depend very much how they're priced. Hybrid seed, the success is very crucial to how that seed is priced. And if it's priced out of the market, people won't pick it up.
And one other question I've got for you. Obviously, last year we had this breakdown in yellow rust resistance. Most of the growers, I think, now are out there looking for varieties to manage risk, not to add to it.
No.
Are those choices available, really? I mean, we've got a few very dominant varieties, limited gene pool. What's happening?
Yeah, I think considering how dramatic the breakdown was and how many varieties, particularly in the hard feed sector, were impacted, I think the fact that even we've got varieties, on our stand now and on the recommended list and in trial that have got 7, 8s, 9s for yellow rust resistance. The breeders do an amazing job in this country. I think we very much take for granted what very dynamic breeding setup we have in the UK. And they've been able to respond. And, we've got new varieties on the list with an 8s and 9s for yellow rust resistance. We've got lots of candidates coming through. So they've been quick to respond, and you don't have to wait long for them to come up with the answer. So we're lucky.
Sasha White from AHDB. Given all of the developments in plant breeding, most growers are still going to need an effective crop management program, an effective spray strategy. You have worked on a number of tools, including your BYDV tool. Can you just explain what that actually does and how that works?
the new BYDV tool is something we've been developing over the last couple of years. It's going to be available later this summer, so it should go live in August. It's different to the tool that's already there, the T-Sum tool that AHDB have already offered and is available through others as well. The T-Sum tool is good, but it's pretty simple. I mean, it's based solely on your weather and when you drilled, so it doesn't take account of all the risk factors for BYDV, and there are a lot of others that are important. And also the T-Sum tool is potentially quite conservative, so it might suggest thinking about more sprays than you might otherwise consider doing. The new tool it accounts for things like the numbers of aphids flying every year, the proportion of those aphids that actually have the virus. This has never been accounted for before. Other risk factors for your crop. It models then the build-up of aphid populations in your field, the infection of your crop, and it then does a cost-benefit analysis to work out whether treating for BYDV at that point is economically worthwhile. So it uses things like your predicted yield, your expected grain prices, your treatment costs to calculate the break-even point for applying an insecticide. So we're hoping by using it that you should still be able to get very good control of BYDV. It will reduce the amount of insecticides, which will reduce input costs, and also importantly reduce resistance risk. We already have resistance to one of the two aphids that spread BYDV. It's not complete resistance, so you should still be able to get control. But what we don't want to see is, since we've lost neonicotinoids, the reliance is increasingly on pyrethroid insecticides. That if we rely too heavily on those, then we'll get stronger forms of resistance appearing and new forms of resistance. And then if that happens, then the equation for control of BYDV changes dramatically.
So it's a more sophisticated approach.
Absolutely, yeah. So you can better judge whether you need to spray. You can also look at the effect of adjusting your sow date as well. So we all know that delaying sow date is good generally, but this allows you to visualize what impact just shifting sow date by even a week or two might have, and also what impact that might have on your following spray program. I'll be talking about it in a bit more detail tomorrow afternoon at the CETA shelf stage.
Thank you. You don't grow any cereals at all, do you? I don't even know why you're on stage.
It's all like nonsense. No, it's not nonsense. Look, it's fascinating. We don't grow any cereals now. No, we just grow maize and grass. But it's interesting to hear, and the challenge is there. I mean, the fungus thing is huge potentially, and trying to get on top of that. I think I always want from my grass and from my forage, to optimise, have the best varieties and get the best bang for my buck in terms of what I put on and get the best quality forage out. And it's exactly the sort of stuff that you guys are trying to do on the arable side. Obviously, as livestock producers, we hugely rely on the success or failure of that. So it's great to see it advancing. I just hope that that landscape of development going forward is fertile enough that we can really start to take advantage of some of the technologies, for example, around gene edit and that sort of stuff, and those frameworks come into place. Obviously, with the SPS thing hovering in the distance, or in the near future, actually, in terms of when it's likely to happen, that potentially could curtail some of that development and that progress. But we absolutely need to keep our feet on the gas, don't we, in terms of that development, so we're not spending too much time talking about these problems which could be solved.
Absolutely. Sasha, when you're at the AHDB and you're looking to develop a new tool or something like that, do you focus on one specific area, or do you look across the board and try to decide where the biggest opportunity is for reducing cost, for taking cost out, or saving farmers money fundamentally without impacting yield in a way that is meaning that they don't get any gain at the end of the day?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, developing these new tools, it falls under our kind of research program. The research program that we have, it absolutely takes into account where the best benefit that research can produce for our levy payers. So whether it's developing a new tool or developing a new research project, for us it's about understanding where we can help deal with problems that we've got now, but also looking a bit further down the road and trying to anticipate problems, because the problems we're going to have next year, 3 years away, are going to be very different to this year. We know that. It changes year to year. So we've got to have a diversity of research projects out there, and that includes the tools that we develop. we will develop tools where we see the potential to do that. So the reason we developed the BYDV tool is because after the loss of neonicotinoid seed treatments, there was research done starting in 2019 that looked to develop old models, see whether they could be updated and tested for the UK. That's where this model, that underpins the tool that we're developing, came from. So we had an opportunity to build on research that had already been done. Where we see other opportunities for developing tools to help our growers, we'll do it. So we've just developed a new SFI cost-benefit tool that helps people understand which SFIs might work for them. It also helps them understand the costs associated with that SFI for them, and then what they'll get for that SFI, so they can see what will be the net profit of doing the SFI for them. They can also see where they can put unproductive areas of land into SFI, what effect that will have compared to productive areas. So these are the sorts of things. That's another tool that we've just developed, and again, it's just to help our growers deal with some complex decisions.
And where do you see that going? Do you see that more stuff like that coming down the line for you? I mean, where's the next big thing coming from?
I think increasingly, from a crop protection perspective, it's more complex than it ever was. You know, we're increasingly reliant on more than just chemical control for very good reasons. But where you're relying on more than chemical control, where you're looking at things like reducing risk, all those things that can minimise your need to use a pesticide in the first place, it makes those decisions much more complicated. So I think decision support tools can really help distill complex decisions that have lots of moving parts down into much simpler messages for our levy payers.
Thank you. Claire Lehman, a sort of a similar question to you. I mean, we've spoken about BYDV resistance. Louise has mentioned hybrid wheat and barley. We've also talked a little bit about rusts and the situation there. In terms of breeding and your world, where do you see the next big thing coming from? Is it more of the same? Is it incremental improvements, or are we waiting for something special?
No, I think it's incremental, and I think the shift has really changed from chasing yield to just having resilient varieties. You know, I've been asked a lot this morning about what variety is good in drought. When you plant the variety, you don't know you're going to have a drought. So actually, the varieties we want are varieties that can perform at with whatever is thrown at them. So you want consistency and continuity, and sort of so that when farmers are planning and budgeting in the autumn, what they actually plan for there is what they get at the end. And I think that's worth a lot more now. So I think that's much more the world we're in now, to sort of smooth out what's going to happen and minimise risk.
No one thing, is it? It's a combination of lots of things and working together.
It is, yeah.
I mean, Louise, we've heard about some practical tools for reducing the cost of growing crops. Enough to make the decision whether to plant a more straightforward one, you would hope?
You would hope, wouldn't you? I mean, sorry about this, but when you walk out there and you see the soils and the potential or lack of, it's going to be a very different decision, isn't it, for a farm like this as opposed to a farm over in the east. So, yeah.
I've talked to a lot of people this morning, and everyone has been pretty positive, actually. I haven't had anyone that's been really down and talking not about it. There's been quite a lot of, obviously we've got quite a lot of new Group 1 varieties. There's been a lot of conversation about the Group 1s anyway, but also about that is probably the area that is most questionable. But a real mixed response. Some saying, I think I need to cut back, but others saying, actually, I'm a really good Group 1 grower. I'm in it for the long haul. You have to look at the long game, and actually you have ups and downs, and you just have to ride it out, and because this is what I'm good at.
Claire Lehman from NIAB, Sasha White from AHDB, thank you very much for joining us. I think both Sasha and Claire are here all day today, all day tomorrow. Do go along and have a look at the AHDB stand, and go and have a look at the NIAB plots as well, and I'm sure they'll be happy to answer any questions. A round of applause, please. Thank you.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast. The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
So we've talked about the economics and the agronomy, and now I guess we come to what in many senses is the most important question of all. Does anyone outside of farming actually understand the challenges that farmers face? Do they care? And if they don't, how do we change that? To discuss that in this final sort of 20 minutes or so, we've got Patrick Galbraith, who writes on rural affairs for the Daily Telegraph. And we've also got George Badger and Charlie Ireland from Ceres Rural, both agronomists and farm business advisors in their own right, but also working very closely with Diddley Squat Farm here. Patrick, you write for a national newspaper read by a very large and indeed influential readership. We were talking earlier about how you pitch farming stories, how you get farming coverage into the Telegraph. How much awareness is there outside of farming, do you think, about the challenges facing UK farmers at the moment?
I think there's a lot of sympathy, but how you tell stories is the really important thing. So, I mean, even within the Telegraph, I had quite a senior editor walk over to me the other day and said, "You've written the word abattoir. Do you think we need to sort of explain to readers what that actually is?" And so the level of knowledge is really remarkably low. So you have to kind of pick and choose. There was I think it's really sort of characterizes it. Yesterday, the NFU had their statement about the support that farmers need in terms of buying fertiliser because the fertiliser price is so high. And I wrote that story up, and it was basically farmers asking for government support. And in the editing process, it became farmers asked for taxpayer money for fertiliser, and that's sort of deeply frustrating. So I find myself, I don't know whether this is going live at any point, I might get in trouble from people at the Telegraph, but I find myself sort of, as much as writing stories, saying to people, this is how we have to tell this story. But I think Charlie would agree with this, that sympathy among the public for farmers is pretty high at the moment, but it's just choosing what we say and how we say it, I think, is important.
So you're almost educating your readership, educating in a nice way your editor, as well as telling the story. It's quite a responsibility.
Yeah, which I hope I'm doing with some degree of competence.
Charlie and George, you're in a very sort of privileged position in a way, working here with Diddley Squat. You also have a massive audience. Charlie, I know you're more front of camera, and George is, I wouldn't say the power behind the throne, but certainly very much, maybe he is, very much involved as well. But how much of what we see on the television is true, and how much is myth, and how much is reality? And George, you're nodding, so I'm going to ask you first.
Charlie's not a very good actor. If you asked him to act, it would be awful.
Thanks. It's entirely true. Everything, the cameras roll. I don't know what the stat is, but there's some horrendous figure. The edit, hundreds of hours for every hour of. So it's literally, it's the power of the edit. The themes come out of the story. And I think Patrick said it. It's the storytelling that's so good. Jeremy articulates that so well. But yeah, there's nothing made up, nothing scripted. It's a capturing what is happening on the farm.
So it's about nuance, and for you, I guess, all the things that we see are happening, but it's what you focus on, the things that go wrong, the constant battle. Does that play well with the public audience, really, when we want farming to be seen as a success?
I think the farm's been in a position where we have been able to try lots of different enterprises, and that's been great because the viewer can see, I was thinking of perhaps starting a rare breed pig enterprise, but now I can see how someone else has done it, document that process, and very much in a real life setting, see whether it's been a success or not. And we don't want to shy away from failures, and we also want to say when things work well. And there's been great examples of both. Those watching the show recently will have seen introduced to the Easy Care sheep, and they've been a brilliant success for the farm here, which you'll see a bit more in a couple of episodes' time.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to give the plot away.
Apologies.
Louise?
Yeah, well, a question for Patrick, really. We know that politicians respond to public opinion, and if the general public doesn't really understand or want to know more about farming, politicians won't feel any pressure to act. How do you deal with that in your journalism?
Well, I think what we're doing a lot of the time is contacting government officials and saying, the public really care about this, you need to give us an answer. And I mean, even at the moment with reform, they haven't put much meat on the bone in terms of their agricultural policies. And I'd really like to get into that, but they just haven't really gone there. So, I've been trying to persuade whoever I can, whether it's Nigel Farage or other people within the party, that they need to do that because people are wondering.
They want to know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hugh.
Look, my first question to Charlie is talking about your scenarios on the show and all that goes on, and watching one of the most recent episodes. Presumably, when you decide to get some easy care sheep and you want to run them through the race to do something to them, I'm assuming at some point someone did say, we could get someone with a sheepdog that would do it instantly and quickly. And then presumably someone in the creative goes, no, let's just get people to do it. So it's an utter farce and takes 10 times longer than it should do.
Hugh, I'm not there all the time. And I don't watch it, so I don't know what you're talking about.
It's very entertaining, but probably not for the sheep.
But it's true. Our business wouldn't be very good if Charlie was here the whole time. He does have to help other farms as well. So the farming happens when we're not around as well.
And George watches my timesheets a lot, so he likes to make sure that I'm pulling my weight. I hear what you say, but
But I'm assuming there's an episode coming up where someone's got a sheepdog, and then we all go, "Oh, look at that! Farming and technology in action." I'm really impressed with the jump into technology that we've seen in this latest series, and it's showing that evolution of, where the farm's got to, where it's going. It's much like lots of other people's businesses, I suppose, doing the same thing, trying to grasp at the technology and hopefully make a big difference in.
Yeah, I think the technology is really interesting because it's available to all farms, and what we're trying to do during this is ultimately identify the value, where the value comes to the farmer, because you can actually invest a huge amount in technology as a farmer producer, and actually it deliver quite a narrow end goal, and trying to get them all to link together is really important, so you can get multiple, data learnings, whatever the word is, from the same source. So that something that we feel quite strongly about.
Fundamentally, Clarkson's farm is still about producing food, and it's done a world of good in increasing the public awareness of the importance of homegrown food. I'm going to ask Patrick about food security. It's something that us in the farming industry, we talk about all the time, the fragility of supply chains. How do you write about food security to what is essentially an urban audience?
Well, it's tricky. I mean, so there's about 1 million readers of the Telegraph online, and they're very, as I say, sympathetic towards farming, and they're very interested in the idea of conservation, and yet they will, as a group, I think, still eat farmed salmon. During COVID, I think lots of us started to think about supply chain, shopping local, going to farm shops. As soon as COVID finished, I think we reverted back to our old ways. So yeah, I mean, I think food security is something that people think about, but actually, that connection between buying food at your local supermarket and the people producing it and where it's being produced, I don't think our readers as a collective understand that or really feel that.
Is there any way that we could get more farming coverage in the Telegraph? Are there stories that go well?
I think reaching out to journalists, who are at, I mean, often I'll get emailed by farmers to say, would this be of interest? And, 7 times out of 10, the answer is no, not really. It's a story about their sheepdog or something. But actually, often it is of interest. And I think, the thing with the Telegraph is a centre-right publication. So when we write about farming, look, there's lots that our readers don't know. There's lots of things they do in terms of their food buying habits that are probably slightly problematic. But I think farming should be thinking about how it gets into the Guardian, how it gets into the Observer, conversations they're having with the Green Party. I think there's a lot to be said in life for identifying those who understand you least and perhaps who don't tend to like you, and you go and speak to them. So I think the Telegraph is important, but actually in terms of getting farming's message out there are other publications that matter as much, if not more.
Louise.
Yeah, Charlie and or George, we're sitting here today on a farm that has become famous really about how difficult farming is, and yet I think you are both very positive about the future. How does that stack up? How does that work?
I think it is easy to dwell on a lot of negatives, but just recently we have seen some positives. We've seen fuel prices coming down. Fortunately, we've seen fertiliser coming down, and we were setting budgets sort of on worst case scenarios, and already those are starting to look better. For mixed farms, those incorporating beef and lamb enterprises, lamb's at a record high at the moment, and I think it is a case of people integrating different enterprises, in farming enterprises still within their system, rather than having all of their eggs in one basket. We also have the SFI coming back out. That cap was perhaps higher than many were expecting. It won't help big farms, but for the majority of farms, it will be a useful transition through. And I think there is going to be more land opportunities coming available. We're seeing quite a few farm business tenancies, contract farming agreements, and there's been no shortage of interest of people to take those on. So in some respects, if you are looking to expand and perhaps you've got your succession plan sorted, you've maybe got the next generation coming through that are enthusiastic, what better time to expand and take on when things are at a bit of a cyclical low?
Change, I think George has said, he's absolutely spot on as ever. But fundamentally, most of our clients are long-term farming businesses. They look at things not on an annual cycle. Yeah, the annual cycle is important, but actually most of them are invested in a business that's going to be, delivering sustainable profits for 5-10 years longer. And actually, there are lots of opportunities out there. I won't go into all of them, and therefore that optimism to sort of, beat the challenge of making a profit is actually quite exciting. We're seeing that on quite a lot of businesses. Yeah, we can't help. We know there are cash flow problems, resulting from a couple of poor harvests, but the potential of a good harvest does change the sentiment quite a lot. And as George is right, I've bored the whole of series with this comment for a while, but as Warren Buffett said, when others are being greedy, be wary, and when others are being wary, be greedy. And it seems that a sense of businesses in that point at the moment is actually there are some opportunities out there. Let's just move forward in a positive way. And I think it's fun to work with businesses like that.
It's funny, isn't it? Because the programme success is all about the challenges, the trials and tribulations and all of that stuff. And then there are opportunities out there, and things can go well in farming. But if you just did a farming programme about everything went well, nobody would watch it because it wouldn't be really very interesting.
Well, it's not that we plan for everything to go wrong. Going back to your comment earlier, we film what happens. We don't make up what happens. The irony is Amazon didn't commission the second season until after the 2022 harvest, where we had a mega harvest. You didn't see that, so it was good. But with lots of different activities, stuff happens, and that's the reality. As it does on any farm. If you're filming 400 hours of TV to make, things happen on each farm that are humorous, dangerous, comical, serious, and that's it's every emotion, isn't it?
And those are the bits that get concentrated and are entertaining for people to watch. And Charlie, you did a Q&A with Andy Willman a couple of weeks ago, and one of the questions from the audience was, we'd love to see a bloopers reel of Clarkson's farm. That would be hilarious. And Andy sat there and said, have you not seen the show? Because it is a concentration of 12 months of filming. Let's concentrate the entertaining bits, the serious bits, the funny bits, all into 8 40-minute episodes. So it does look like a lot happens, but a lot can happen in a year on a farm.
It's basically now you put a report into AI and ask it to shrink it into one page. That's what you get to watch.
Thank you. I'm going to leave the last word to Patrick Galbraith from the Telegraph. How are we perceived as an industry? Are we perceived as a bunch of moaners where things are always going wrong? Would it be better if we were more optimistic and happy? I mean, I think optimism is something that goes hand in hand with farming. Otherwise, we wouldn't be planting crops in the autumn.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's always worth going down into the comments section of any article on farming at the Telegraph, and you can only sort of bear it for about 5 minutes because some of it's completely unhinged. But I think there is a perception that farmers are sort of, have it easy. They've got these assets that are worth a huge amount of money, and that they complain all the time. That is a perception. But certainly this Labour government has won farmers a huge amount of favour with the public at large, and that's really reflected, I think. And I think if you look at what the government is doing now, we touched on SFI. It's not as bad as some people thought it would be. And certainly, I speak to DEFRA 2-3 times a week. And when I call them up and say to them, we're writing on farming, they know they're going to be getting a hammering and they don't like it anymore. They've felt the pain. So I think it's a good time for farming to keep pushing.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm going to draw it to a close. I'd love to continue, actually, but we've got another session on after this one. So that's it from this Farmers Weekly podcast live from Cereals 2026. Thank you to all our guests, to Andrew Williamson, Andrew Dewing, Claire Lehman, Sasha White, and put your hands together for Patrick Galbraith, Charlie Island and George Badger, and for Louise MP and Hugh Broom. And if you've enjoyed being here today, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Farmers Weekly and enjoy the rest of Cereals 2026. I'm Johan Tasker. Thank you very much.